Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. This week I'm speaking to Lyndon Purcell. So Lyndon is a very interesting guy. I'll tell you a bit more about the sort of things about Lyndon once we get into the podcast, but what we're speaking about this week is hypertrophy. So we went quite in depth on hypertrophy. We talked about the mechanisms of hypertrophy and then how volume affects that, all sorts of things like that. I'll leave some timestamps in the description as those have been requested quite a lot. I've had a few comments for those. But yes, I'll leave some timestamps there. And yeah, let me know what you thought about this episode. It's a bit different from what I normally do, but I quite enjoyed it and I think it's a very, very valuable episode. Thank you very much for listening.
People are constantly raising the bar.
Sacrifices need to be made.
What would you guys say are your biggest weaknesses?
You are your enemy right now.
Is success a lie?
Just a fucking podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. This week I'm speaking to Lyndon Purcell from JPS Education. So I hope you have heard of JPS. They're an Australian sort of education, coaching and personal training company. They run out of a gym and they make some really, really nice content online. So they make this thing called the JPS Mentorship Program. It's a really, really nice program. I hope you've heard of it. I believe it is to sort of train you to be a personal trainer, and sort of something that I really like that they're doing is they're sort of trying to change the game of personal training quite a bit, because obviously a lot of personal trainers aren't that great and they don't really do too much to actually help you learn and grow. And I really like how JPS sort of changes that and actually shifts it to making the person learn and actually, because I think a lot of people say they want the person to learn, but a lot of the time that's not the case. But I think at JPS it really is. So Lyndon, how did you get into this? How did you start with JPS and how did you start personal training and educating in general?
Yeah, so for starters, I started lifting sometime during high school with a bunch of mates. A bunch of mates started growing like weeds and I was left well and truly behind. So that was the first thing that drew me to sort of more of like an evidence-based approach. At the time, I thought an evidence-based approach was reading Men's Health, Muscle and Fitness, that kind of a thing. But I would scour every magazine every month, sort of pick up. I was probably only had a very not well-paid part-time job at the time, and everything was spent on magazines. So I started writing programs for my friends and diets and like well and truly things that I shouldn't have been doing at the age of about 16. Blokes twice my age and things like that. But I was giving it a go for whatever that's worth. And instantly I wanted to go to university and study exercise and sports science. And then towards the end of my degree, I was facing this, what felt like quite a difficult decision for me. I was always looking at every bit of sports science that I learned at uni through the lens of how does this apply to body composition? How does this get people leaner or more jacked or strong? Because they all sort of, I guess, fall into the same category. Force production and things like that are important for other sporting endeavors, but that was the lens I looked at it through. And I guess I always felt like I wanted to be more of a personal trainer because they deal with body composition, but it was kind of the choice of, did I want to follow an evidence-based approach, which would have been sort of more, which I found common in S&C circles. So I was like, I don't really want to work with athletes. To be honest, all footballers pretty much present mostly the same problems. There's some awesome S&C coaches out there with, who do a fantastic job with athletes. And I'm not saying all athletes present with the same problems, but, if you get a bunch of the same people doing the same sporting activity, it becomes a bit monotonous over time. So it was kind of like, do I want to use a research-based approach or do I want to do what I want to do? And that's body composition. So, as fate would have it, if you believe in that kind of stuff, I stumbled across JPS. A friend recommended me. I was telling them about this choice that I had. I was like, I don't know where to take my career. They were like, oh, check out JPS. Checked out JPS, and then the first thing I saw was like 1 week left to enroll in the JPS mentorship program or something like that, or 1 spot left, I think it was actually. Instantly contacted Jacob, and before I got an email back from him, I made sure I read every blog on the website. We organized that meeting, went in, we instantly started talking about Mike Israetel, Lara McDonald, all these guys. yeah, sorry, long story short, I'll try and rush through as quickly as possible. Went through the mentorship program, which was very small scale at that stage. Just a couple of PTs that came and did it in person. I found myself in numerous disagreements with Jacob across that process, across the 12 weeks, and that earned his respect, I believe, as much as it pissed him off. He only said to me the other day, he's like, I used to fucking hate presenting. Like, you're such a little, I just go him. But that was good for both of us. Like, I was an arrogant little shit at the time and probably was speaking on things that was what I thought I did, but it also kept Jacob in check, I believe. And he's like, oh, wow, like, because he's a self-taught, I guess, like he's never had very like formal learning. Yeah, so we ended up just finding this nice little group with each other. I got a job, and then I would like to think worked tirelessly since in building JPS, because it is something that I care about. And just as you said, this was off air, I think you said, personal training is, if someone's like, I want to get a personal trainer, you said pretty much don't, and I would say the exact same thing. Like, the standard of personal training is
what do you
so
think
low.
Makes it, what do you think is the main issue currently with it, and what do you think is the main thing they should change, or do you think they need quite a big change to get there?
I'm always for small changes as opposed to big changes, just in sort of as a general principle, like smallest effective dose or whatever you want to call it. I guess the terminology I prefer to use is sort of like you make incremental changes as opposed to categorical.
Yes.
To be honest, there are lots of areas in general. Like, I don't necessarily know how to tackle it, because if I did, I'm sure the issue could probably be solved eventually. But there's a lot of elements. It's so easy to get your qualification. There's lots of people that don't care about the standard of the qualification. They just want, numbers through, because that earns the money.
Yeah. There's
the people that the up and coming trainers aspire to, and they're, more of your Samoan pandas as opposed to your Eric Helmses. Yeah, it's obviously multifaceted, but I guess at least from what I can do and JPS can do is we just want to provide a good personal training service and show that it is possible, and provide educational services if others are interested in learning what we do.
So then, with the whole issue of personal trainers, what do you think is the main things that they're kind of getting wrong? Because I can see that there's an issue, but I find it hard to pinpoint the main issues. And then I think if you can pinpoint the issues, then it's, I guess, a step in the right direction to sort of figuring out and fixing it, hopefully.
Yeah, so sorry, just like lagged a little bit there, but I think I got you. Oops, I just double screened you. There we go. Yeah, I would say the primary issue is just that they do not understand what they are trying to achieve. Or they might know the end goal, but the appropriate process to go and get someone leaner, stronger, whatever. And then there's so many question marks between that process or that outcome and training someone on an individual basis.
Do you feel like that is mainly, are we talking from an adherence basis? Are we talking from actual training principles basis? Where's the main areas that they're sort of fucking up?
Like everything. Yeah.
That sucks.
Not understanding, like simple things like thinking being on the leg press will grow your quads. It's like, no, the leg press is just an opportunity to load knee flexion, knee extension, tension on a muscle. It's like I've got friends that got into the fitness industry as well at similar times, and they're more stuck in that. I made up a new training concept. It's called, dark mindset training or something like that. And it's just like, look how much pain I can put myself through on the rope push down.
Yeah.
You've got to do 45 reps in 25 seconds, and then it's 50 reps in 0 seconds, and like they are just too many. Sorry, to bring it back a little bit, too many people are just associating pain and suffering and then believing that will lead to results.
I 100% agree. And I think it's all too common. And do you think things like, for instance, in New Zealand, we have this thing called Les Mills. It's just like a big gym. I think it's maybe in Australia as well. And everyone goes there and does the classes. And the classes are basically just HIIT. And it pisses me off to no end, because it's like, when have you ever seen someone get really, really fit and jacked and whatever their goal is through some classes? Like, I feel like it's very rare, because I feel like very, very rarely are you getting the most benefits out of an exercise because it's hard. I feel like obviously that's a reasonable measure, but what do you think is a better measure to figure out if an exercise or a exercise program is actually useful?
Yeah, you need to be measuring. It's going to be dependent on what you are trying to achieve with the program, obviously. But just to sort of go back to the hard thing, like productive training is hard, but that's a byproduct of productive training. It's not, hard training shouldn't be the goal.
Yeah.
And I feel as though that is becoming a more prominent message, at least in the evidence-based community. But then the problem we face is, how do we expand the evidence-based community? Like, how infiltrate the more bro community? Not to dismiss them. Like, I guess if they are happy doing what they're doing, they're not hurting people, it's not so much an issue.
But then I think they can, though, because
they are.
I think a lot of them are. Like, that's the thing. It's like when you described before, that personal trainer sort of thing, thinking that just because they're on the leg press and loading it and moving the weight a little bit, that means that their leg's going to grow. It's like that's I feel like that's so common, and it doesn't feel as common when you look at YouTube, because I feel like that's when a lot of people get their information, hopefully. But it's like, if you look at the Jeff Nippards and the Vitruvian Physiques and the Omar Isufs, it's like they're pretty good. And then it's like, then you look at Instagram and it's total bullshit. And like that, it puzzles me how. But I guess the whole crux of it is people. Oh, this is what I think it is people don't want. They don't want that. Well, they want that easy fix, and that hard work feels like the easy fix, so it feels straightforward.
Yep.
But then I guess
completely.
Do you feel like it's, especially when it comes to hypertrophy, it's more complex than just it being hard for many, many, many reasons?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is necessary for the fitness industry as a whole to progress is probably shedding some of the perception that it's just a meathead activity. I guess that's something that has always drawn me to sports science, and probably more specifically like hypertrophy science, is that it's almost this juxtaposition, like dichotomy of it's being so nerdy about one of the most meathead things on earth.
Yeah.
And I just find that such an intriguing concept. So I do think, for the fitness industry as a whole to progress, there does need to be hey, we are a profession or an industry. There are certain things you need to know. We are knowledgeable in them. If you want help, we can help you. But just because there's a guy out there with muscles who got big without help doesn't mean you can do it too, sort of thing. There's plenty of people out there walking around that are healthy and didn't have the help of doctors, but
I know what you mean. Yeah, because it's
but
I think people make that tie way too often. Like, for instance, I find I get dismissed by my peers quite often because I'm not the biggest guy in the room. Like, I started off at 52 kilos, now I'm 72 kilos, and it's still extremely, extremely small. But if you look at the percentage growth, I've done more than everyone in the room, and it annoys me to no end, because it's okay, I've literally had the top experts in the world on my podcast. I could ask them my own questions, and then it's you would still think that the guy who's bigger knows more or is the better person to ask a question. Like that, it baffles me. It is I get why, kind of, not really, but it's that sort of thinking, I think, is ridiculous. Like, for instance, if you ask Michael Phelps, oh, how do you be a fast swimmer? He might give you a decent answer, but it's like, that's not why he's the fastest swimmer in the world. He might give you, it's like how creating content, if you can, someone can tell you your content's wrong, or it's not perfect, but they can't tell you why, because they don't know, they have no clue. So it's like, I feel like it's that whole thing. And what do you think are the main sort of, especially when it comes to hypertrophy, the main things people are fucking up and thinking that that's the way when it's really not, and then we'll go over afterwards what is the correct way.
Yeah. The first probably one is just the perception that it's hard. Like, without a doubt, it has to be hard. But the way most people achieve hard is like really skyrocketing their heart rate and things like that. Like rushing around, doing a bunch of exercise, and like, yep, I feel tired, I'm sweating. You know, they've got the big sweat across the back, like T-Nation kind of advertisement, like sweat dripping off the forehead sort of a thing. And meanwhile, this person's, 65 kilos and sorry, not to dismiss people that are smaller, as you said, and you should be commended on your transformation, by the way. I think it's fantastic.
Nice.
I'm certainly no muscular individual myself, so I shouldn't be shitting on those people, but it's like, that's not the way to go about it. Like, I think
if it's not working, it's not working.
Yeah, like, we need to understand that just certain things we do send certain signals in the body, and that results in certain outcomes. And at least sort of more aerobic style training, although it feels hard, it's not the way to go about it.
Yeah. Do you think there's, like, for instance, there's a lot of argument, or there's somewhat argument around momentum. Like, for instance, if you're doing a T-bar row, how much momentum's okay? How much is not okay? Okay, if you can fatigue the... I can't remember who said it, but someone said, and I'm not convinced by their argument, but for instance, if you can use a little bit of momentum on a T-bar row for the last few reps, could that be beneficial? And then my thing is, I like I'm very sort of similar to like Steve Hall, track everything, basically make sure you can measure pretty much everything, and then increase that. Don't increase shit you can't actually measure. I guess, do you think you have to measure everything, or?
No, I don't necessarily think you have to measure everything. I think you need to measure the most important variables. And again, just to address Steve Hall, like he was a smaller dude, and now look at him, like he's blowing up. Yeah. So anyone that was sort of shitting on Steve's protocol can mostly eat dick at this point. Okay. So the T-bar row, how much momentum is okay? Like, minimal, I would say. And then if someone was to make a case for using momentum, I think the burden of proof is on their shoulders. Like, if you want to suggest that using momentum's okay, go for it. Convince me. But I'm going to be unconvinced up until that point. I'm not just going to be like, oh, let's start using momentum, and then if I'm going to stop using momentum, someone has to convince me. Like,
yes.
At certain...
It's not innocent until proven guilty sort of thing. It's more was sort of a weird analogy, but it's like it has to be disproven to be done instead of the other way around. So it's like you have to, just because it could theoretically kind of maybe help doesn't mean that it should just be used.
Yeah, exactly. Like Thomas Sowell, someone who I'm a big fan of, but he has some certain questions whenever someone makes a claim of something. It's like, if we're taking the case of using momentum in the T-bar row, he would ask, compared to what, at what cost, essentially. Like, okay, so momentum in the T-bar row is a good thing. Compared to what? Not using momentum. What's the cost of using momentum? Oh, potentially higher risk of injury. To me, you just, like, why are you trying to move joints that you aren't trying to train? Like, yes, you might be able to get through harder ranges of motion, but muscle growth comes from developing tension. So you're just getting through to easier portions of the movement.
Yeah.
That are just therefore going to require less tension almost. Like it's...
What about... Here I'm going to play a little bit devil's advocate. I'm relatively uninformed here, but do you think... What about the argument that you fatigue on the concentric before the eccentric and you could maybe get a few reps eccentrically?
Yeah, you certainly can. Like, you are stronger. It is easier to resist gravity than it is to overcome it. But like I would need to, again, like, why someone would have to convince me. It's like, what are you trying to achieve? You're trying to achieve muscle growth or more reps. You're trying to achieve muscle growth. You've already done a great job of that. You can do another set safely. Like, and you don't grow muscle in one set, one workout, 1 week, 1 month. Like, as you well and truly know, like, it takes motherfucking forever. So I'm just a big fan of stacking the deck in your favor while staying patient. And I don't think the need to get a couple of extra eccentric reps is going to make 9-day difference. They potentially come, or almost certainly come, with more muscle damage, which is still teasing out, may hinder muscle growth to some degree.
Right, so do you think... One thing that I would like to briefly go over is, and sort of, I think it's a very good sort of thing as baseline, what do you think is the correct way to go about hypertrophy? So rep ranges, the kinds of sets you'd be doing, exercise selection, anything you should avoid, all that sort of stuff, even though I know it's a very, very, very broad topic.
No, of course. So for starters, I would be careful in saying this is the correct way. And I'm not picking on your terminology. Like, I'm just saying, as a preface to whatever I say, we can never know anything is correct. We can just basically know what is incorrect. With that said, almost, given a relatively smart approach, and that's a very, very loose term, almost anything is correct to some degree. And like, that's the thing, like, you can almost justify anything. If you start doing reps of sets of 45, if you have a sound rationale for that and you can convince me, I'm like, sweet, go for it.
Do you think do you think for a lot of things there is not yet a sound theory behind it, or a sound rationale behind most things that most people are doing, like most personal trainers are doing?
Yes, I would say most people, and this isn't just in hypertrophy training, the fitness industry, I think this is just in life, most people operate on a very low level thinking sort of, that most people, I find, just wander through life mindlessly. This is potentially my own biases, and I probably become more neurotic and over analytical than the average person, but I need to know why I'm doing something, and if I don't know why I'm doing it, then it drives me crazy. When we're going to try to grow muscle, we need to create tension. I can't really say that word enough, because that is just what it fundamentally comes down to. Unless you're putting vitamin
are we
S
talking
in your bum.
Mechanical tension?
Yeah.
Would you like to explain that? Because I think people, they think when they hear, like, people who don't sort of know too much will say, they'll hear mechanical tension, they'll think, okay, cool, I'm going to do a 3 rep max. So how do you explain mechanical tension and varying over rep ranges and all that?
Yeah, completely. And I think that's a great point. Like, it's evident to me that you've observed a lot in the fitness industry just by seeing these things. Like, a lot of people think they're a sort of a fitness industry expert, and they say things. I'm just like, you've read a couple of blogs and you haven't watched anyone train. But you are completely right. Whenever someone hears tension, they're like, heavy weight, load that shit up. But okay, I've got to keep myself focused here. Mechanical tension is what occurs when So in muscle cells, we have myofibrils like myosin, actin, and they grab onto each other essentially, and they pull. Actin is basically the road, and myosin is the motor and the wheels that connect to that road and then run along it. If you just think of basically two hands reaching out, grabbing each other and pulling on each other, that's all you really need to think about. So to create tension, we need to have cross-bridging between myosin and actin. And then different factors and variables will distinguish exactly how much tension we generate. So we can look at the length-tension relationship, and we get differing amounts of tension based on how long a muscle is, or the force-velocity relationship. And slower movements tend to generate more tension. So what we can learn from this is essentially high amounts of tension are generated whenever we move something heavy, so the force component, or when we move under fatigue. Because when you're moving under fatigue, you move more slowly, and that just it makes you experience a greater magnitude of tension. So when we look at programs, almost any program that someone's like, HIIT is the way to go, or high frequency training is the way to go, or emphasis, de-emphasis sessions, things like that. Almost every training program that promotes a greater degree of hypertrophy than another is simply finding a way to generate more force and not suffer too bigger consequences from that.
Right, yeah.
I guess if that makes sense.
Right, and then I believe, I'm just trying to remember, so my knowledge of, because I'm planning on doing a master's in exercise science after I've done, because my first degree I realized I picked it and I hate it, so I'm going to finish it and then do masters, which sucks,
Yep.
But it is how it is. And when it comes to, I believe it's not the three predictors of hypertrophy, the three something of hypertrophy. It's like mechanical
Mechanisms?
tension. Yeah, three mechanisms of hypertrophy. Would you be able to go over the other two and how valuable do you think they are?
So the other two, so mechanical tension is just well and truly established as a mechanism of hypertrophy.
Yeah.
The listeners may be familiar with things like mTOR, and just anabolic pathways like that. That's what mechanical tension tends to stimulate. The next mechanism of hypertrophy that was proposed by Brad Schoenfeld in 2010 was metabolic stress. And metabolic stress is the accumulation of lactate, hydrogen ions, inorganic phosphate, these kinds of things in muscle cells. It was theorized that just the presence of these biochemical fatigue products, I guess, potentiated or enhanced the anabolic response to resistance training. So that's all, just I guess an elaborate way of saying get your muscle to burn and it probably grows.
Right. So would you say it's sort of like icing on the cake? And then mechanical tension might be the batter. So it's sort of...
I am unconvinced that metabolic stress actually plays a role. I think it is...
Do you mean any role at all? Or?
Okay, so this will be me theorizing here. I do think it would play a role, but in a very indirect manner.
Yeah.
So metabolic stress, or the byproducts that contribute to metabolic stress, are created during the process of anaerobic glycolysis, just one of the energy production pathways. The process of anaerobic glycolysis reduces muscle glycogen. If you reduced muscle glycogen, I think in some very roundabout manner, there would be a signal to the body being like, we need a larger storage tank for glycogen in the future because we are burning through this. It's like if you go to sleep at night and only have one glass of water beside your bed and you finish that in the first hour, the next morning you get up and you're like, I need to take a bigger glass to bed through all that water too quickly Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Cool. Sorry. And then, so I think there would be some kind of signal to the body being like, okay, if we're burning through glycogen, we need to either be more efficient with our glycogen use, which very likely happens, or we need to be able to store more of it in the future. And I think that could be a potential problem. The body will tend to look to be more efficient
instead of
first,
hypertrophy.
But yeah, to make a bigger storage tank for glycogen, you basically need bigger muscles. I do think there would be some kind of pathway that metabolic stress signals to grow muscle through, but as it stands, like for starters, elucidating that is just extremely complex.
What do you mean by that?
Elucidate, like shedding light on it, finding that out. Like there are so many.
So
we've got to look
that
for
is
a signal.
Do you think applying that to a program is almost illogical or not useful yet? From what we know now, it is not usually the best choice to try and maximize metabolic stress, or do you think there could be a place in the program for it?
I certainly think there's a place in the program for it. I think so when I'm saying metabolic stress may not be contributing to muscle growth, there are still mechanisms that sets of, say 20 to 30 do contribute to muscle growth. It's just that they are very much likely contributing to muscle growth via tension production.
Yes. So we're not talking because we're not. So would you say this is relatively correct, or from what we know, this could be correct?
Yep.
Say if you did an exercise just for the pump, so you tried to maximize pump, whether it be through supplementation or exercise selection, would you say it's probably maximizing the pump probably isn't the best bet? It's not something you should try and put at the forefront for the most part.
Yeah, I'm sure. I get what you're saying, but I'm not even sure I could stand by that statement. Provided you take the set to near, like probably above an RPE 8 sort of thing, you'll very likely grow. That's.
So would you say the benefits of that would not be from metabolic stress?
Yes,
okay, right, yes.
The primary benefits of high rep sets still mention, and I think there is a little bit of a movement within the scientific literature. I think it's changing slowly over the last few years, but it seems as though some people have tried to find a place for metabolic stress,
right,
which is fine, but then you get, as long as that's counterbalanced by, I guess, a proportion of researchers that are being like, no, we're going to find that it doesn't, sort of thing. Like, research sort of only works because a bunch of people are trying to disprove one another and disprove theories.
Yeah.
The reason I tend to say that, I guess, is because I think the metabolic stress movement seems to be committing what's known as informal logic as like kettle logic, which is where you throw a bunch of theories at an explanation or to explain something, and they don't even have to be reconcilable or like reconciled or reconcilable with each other. So like I could say, like my housemate, I go, where's my mug, sort of a thing. And he might go, I never touched your mug. I gave it back to you. I had it, but I gave it to my girlfriend. Like there's 3 explanations there and none of them actually marry up with each other. He's just trying to find a way to
answer the problem or
answer the problem.
So it's like these people or whoever the proponents of metabolic stress or that contributing to hypertrophy are trying to use separate theories to say that metabolic stress is good. However, they're all contradicting, because you can't have, if it's doing it in this way, it can't do it in that way too. So it's like they can't all be doing the same thing. Is that relatively?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I'm glad you could understand my ramblings. And that's not to say they are completely incoherent with each other. But I think it is just an indicator. Like you know, we could be getting muscle growth through cell swelling, through increased hormone production, through increased activation, like that. What all the proposed theories of why metabolic stress works could all be contributing to some degree. But to me, it's just an example of trying to manipulate the current evidence to prove a theory, as opposed to looking at the current evidence and then after that.
Would you say it's a form of confirmation bias? So they're almost they want it to be right, or they want to be the one that says, hey, it works, or hey, it does contribute, or it is useful, and they're trying to do that as hard as they can.
I do think there's probably an element of that, but I couldn't, because there are so many researchers working on this problem. I obviously can't speak to, and I know effectively zero of them personally, so I wouldn't comment on their character or their motivation. I do just think it is a little bit of an inherent bias within the fitness industry. It's like a lot of us grew up being like loving the pump. Like it's almost the first thing that drew us to training, because it's that it's what makes you look more muscular before you've even grown muscle. It's just I think we all kind of just deep down want it to be true a little bit.
Yeah, so then you can chase it, and it's useful to chase it.
Yeah.
Right. So do you think...
It'd be almost like finding out that, the first time you find out Santa's not real, it's like, oh man, I was about that guy. It's the same sort of thing with the pump.
Yeah, so it's sort of... It would be great if it was useful, but from what we know now, it might not be particularly useful, or might not be particularly useful to focus on it.
Yeah, it would be totally fine to focus on it, especially if it makes you enjoy your training and get back into the gym, which as a personal trainer, I know that's pretty much the limiting factor in people's progress. However, as you sort of touched on earlier, you probably want to be tracking progress or ensuring other lifts are going up as well, and doing things like that, like lifts, sort of in the 5 to 10 rep range that give you a greater indication of whether your force production is increasing, because cross-sectional area is strongly correlated with force. If you're getting stronger, then you are very likely getting bigger after that first newbie gain period.
Yes. And would you say, and can we go over the third mechanism of hypertrophy, and then also we'll cover, you think, its relevance?
So the third, so we've had mechanical tension so far. We need to be putting tension through fibers. They need to be resisting, overcoming, or just holding force in a still sort of, may or may not play a role. And then thirdly, we've got muscle damage. So muscle damage was theorized to play a role because, again, theories come from a lot of different places. But you could look at, say, studies where muscle damage was higher and MPS was higher in the study, or muscle growth may have even been higher, depending on which study.
I'll just jump in there. When we say MPS, we mean muscle protein synthesis.
Yes, which is an indicator of muscle growth. So depending on exactly what the study looked at, but they may have found, muscle damage was higher in this group and growth was higher in this group. But that could have been, they could have just been doing more volume, or they could have looked at MPS and gone, MPS is higher, which will lead to more muscle growth. And there's also myonuclear domain theory, satellite cell activation and things like that, which for anyone that sort of doesn't remember their year 8 biology, if they remember the nucleus, sort of the control center of the cell, it seems that to grow you need to keep adding nuclei, myonuclei, nucleuses to the cell. Damage seems to be one of the ways that occurs. As you create damage, you bring more myonuclei into the cell to help contribute to repair and regeneration, and then they stay there and can then signal for muscle protein synthesis in the future. However, there are also some issues with looking at damage. The words used in the damage sort of conversation are used synonymously with words that they shouldn't be. So people talk about repair and regeneration after a damaging training session.
Yes.
But repair and regeneration are not the same thing as growth. Like, repair is just a muscle cell has become somewhat dysfunctional.
Does this somewhat tie into... Because before, I was going to ask it later, but I think this sort of ties in. When you talked about muscle protein synthesis before, you talked about it as an indicator. And I must say, I haven't done a degree yet, and I haven't done actually that much. Like, all I've done is listen to podcasts and just educate myself through that so far. But when you talk about muscle protein synthesis, I was under the impression that that was the only way. That was like, for instance, when you talk about a caloric deficit, it's the only way to lose weight. So then I thought that muscle protein synthesis was the way you built muscle. But would you say this is incorrect? And does that tie into what you said before? Does that tie sort of into those two concepts?
Yeah, so, no, you are right. Like, change in size because of an imbalance between muscle protein synthesis and breakdown. However, that just looking at muscle protein synthesis in isolation is not, especially over like short time periods. I guess that's where we've run into some flaws with extrapolating based on certain studies, because, you know, they might just look at MPS over a 4-hour period. One group was higher than another, and then concluded this group will eventually end up with more muscle. But
right, instead of sort of extrapolating that to 12 weeks and seeing the actual change in cross-sectional area.
Yeah, completely. Like, MPS is just how much protein is being constructed. That could be myofibrillar or mitochondrial protein. As people that are chasing muscle growth, we want it to be myofibrillar. So that's where some of the flaws surrounding advanced or more advanced trainees should probably train more frequently, because their MPS drops off faster. We'd say that in reverse. Beginners' MPS stayed elevated for longer, but their MPS elevation tended to be more mitochondrial than myofibrillar. So that's almost like it's irrelevant to, I guess, what we're trying to achieve.
Right. Yes. So it's like they're building the wrong thing.
Yeah,
yes.
Which it makes, or not even the wrong thing. It's
not
what they need at the time.
Yes.
But it's not what they're exactly chasing.
Yes, like, that's not going to get you hypertrophy.
Yeah, not directly anyway. We need those mitochondria there for energy production, and obviously energy production is important for productive training in the future. They need, essentially, they're training to be able to train for the things they want to achieve.
Right. Yes.
It's a step they need to go through, but we can't, as a community, draw too much from that information yet. And I think people like James Krieger and things like that have done a great job in recent times in being like, hey, let's, with what we extrapolate from what. This was a problem I ran into over the weekend. Jacob and I were presenting in Perth to a bunch of personal trainers, and I was discussing this topic and trying to bust that myth, essentially, and they hadn't even heard the myth to begin with. And I was like, oh, just forget everything I said then. Like, you guys are probably sweet. Where was I? We'll talk about muscle growth.
So on the third mechanism of hypertrophy, I'd like to talk about how relevant have you found it, and then we'll go over something else afterwards about how you apply all these to a program. So how relevant do you think, with the current literature, how relevant do you think muscle damage is, and how much do you think it applies?
It's a tough question to answer. I would say don't chase it. It should be a byproduct. Does it contribute to hypertrophy? I would say likely, in a roundabout way. It probably potentiates muscle growth to some degree, just the way the body...
What do you mean by potentiate?
Like almost anything you do, so...
Prepares?
Anything we do in like Newton's third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The body doesn't tend to operate in, I guess, equal manners, but if we go into a calorie deficit,
there'll be a reaction.
That, to some degree, potentiates energy storage in the future.
Yes.
Like metabolism slow, and it's not equal. Like, we won't just slingshot back that way, but it is a little bit easier to gain weight after being in a calorie deficit, because being in calorie deficit will just reduce body size, reduce metabolism, all these kinds of things. Whatever we do, the body, because of homeostatic reasons, will upregulate things that do the opposite. So I think if we create damage, it is very likely that the body upregulates things that signal for growth, or at least repair. If repair could be found to be contributive to the growth process, I guess we would be able to draw that conclusion.
Has that been indicated in any of the research, or do you think not yet? Or
partly, I guess we could say. Again, I'm not entirely over this to the degree that a researcher would be. I need to look, for at least what I do on a daily basis, at more applied things. It's just the nerd in me that likes to know these things. I would say, yeah, damage likely contributes, very small amount. The main thing you should be prioritizing is mechanical tension.
Right.
But hey, fingers crossed for damage in the future. I'm all for finding out more ways that our muscles grow.
Yes. And then one thing I'd like to do is, I don't want us to write a program verbally right now, but I'd like to talk about, if you were just talking about hypertrophy, completely disregarding strength gain, it might come along with it, but we'll see. How do you go about designing, if we completely ignore adherence?
Yep.
To a degree, obviously nothing ridiculous, but if we take into account volume, etc., and obviously not getting injured, how do you go about designing a program if we're just considering hypertrophy, nothing else?
The first thing I would need to consider is probably, just given everything you said, like an adherence and injury and all those things aren't a worry, is just on what time scale we're trying to achieve it.
Yeah.
If we were trying to get as...
Should we, for instance, I'll give a... Let's use me as an example, as I think that's interesting. For instance, the person's been training for 3 years. They've gained, I would say roughly, they've gained 20 kilos of weight, maybe whatever amount of that would be muscle, still relatively lean. And then they've been training relatively well, can handle reasonable amounts of volume. I don't want to have to tackle any weird issues. I have a lot of spine issues and all that, which makes exercise selection a priority. But we'll ignore exercise selection for now, unless that comes into it. We'll discuss that. But when it comes to program selection for a relatively intermediate lifter, let's say they're going into a caloric surplus for the next year.
Yep. So I think we have some... If I was to take over your coaching, I would need to learn probably like what things you responded to best, what were our limiting factors. So like, for example, let's say you want to get jacked, like take it as simple as that. And just to probably finish my point from before, if we were trying to get as jacked as possible in 4 weeks, I wouldn't be creating a lot of muscle damage or probably using a lot of variation. Doing, I think, damage or variation or things of that nature through exercises, overall, they probably have better payoffs in the long run, but we don't want to be going through any kind of investment period if we're really trying to get you jacked within the next 4 weeks. But because you're an intermediate trainee, we realize that you're going through this on a longer time scale, you've got plenty of time. However, we don't want to spend the next 2 years investing and not growing anything, essentially. Like, it's about just finding what time scale we want to grow muscle on, continue to be able to grow muscle. Just from a very simplistic perspective, and this is probably the coach in me coming out, is I need to be able to look at variables that I can track. So I would pretty much do whatever I could to put your volume, like increase your volume tolerance and load lifted and probably reps per set on your incline bench press. Like, let's say at the moment you're doing 3x6 on the incline, 3x6 at 60 kilos twice a week on the incline bench press. When I can get that up to 5x10, maybe 2.5 times a week at 80 kilos, then you have like shoulders out here, a chest that you can sit, a cup of water on, that sort of thing. And obviously that's very easy to sort of say that, but it's the reverse engineering of that process that leads to better programming.
Yes.
So let's say your strength is okay, but you're not able to tolerate those higher volumes, or just your set performance drops off very quickly.
Yes.
You might hit 10 on the first set, 6, and then 2. We might need to spend some more time. That might be an indication to me that we need to spend some more time in slightly higher rep ranges, just building your work capacity and your volume tolerance and things like that. Whereas if you can churn out reps, this is something that probably smaller individuals tend to do a little bit better, churn out reps, and they can work relatively hard. They sort of have an ability to endure, but their strength doesn't increase too well. Like, we might need to focus slightly more on that 5 to 8 rep range to really sort of drive your force production up a little bit, and that might be the side of the equation that we need to address. Does that make sense?
Yes. And then one thing that I would really like to cover, would you like to give some general guidelines when it comes to rep ranges, and then what are the upper limits, what are the lower limits, do you think, when we're just talking hypertrophy, nothing else? Yeah.
I would say if you're going any lower than 5, you are probably making a rather direct trade-off. Like, you can certainly grow muscle below 5 reps. Like, you will grow, like, theoretically, I guess, like, grow muscle with, even if you just did 1 RMs. But do you want to grow? So yeah, anything less than 5 probably just comes with greater risk of injury, fatigue, and it might bias slightly towards neural adaptations as opposed to muscular or morphological. Right. So I would say 5.
I'll stop you there. When we talk, so anything below 5 is the main reasons, and this is sort of what I've thought about myself, is the main reasons that it's not useful, usually because of like logistical reasons. For instance, like it's more, say if you do the same exercise every single week and you know roughly what your 10 to 15 sort of rep range weight is, do you feel like it's harder to gauge your 1 to 5 rep max or 1 to 5 rep RPE 9?
Like, that's a factor. However, So what we need to do to ensure we're growing muscle, or a good amount of muscle, is activate high threshold motor units, or our fast twitch fibers, things like that. So we've got our low threshold motor units, which are the ones that we just use sitting here talking, and the body recruits motor units. And when I say motor units, they are just the neuromuscular units that innervate muscle fibers, just so hopefully your listeners can follow me along. So motor units activate muscle fibers. We need, and the body recruits on a per needs basis. It will go smallest to largest. The smallest motor units and muscle fibers tend to grow the least, and become, essentially they are designed for endurance and just continual sort of low output work, and they become dysfunctional and inefficient if they grew too large. Yes. But we all want to grow large, like we all want to be, gigantic and struggle to get out our bedroom door. So we want to be using high threshold motor units. To do that, we need to, that goes back to my first sort of tangent of the podcast, that we need to be high amounts of force or fatiguing out the lower threshold motor units, so that we must recruit high threshold motor units in order to continue the activity.
So it's sort of, it's like higher threshold or lower threshold motor units get used first, and then if you want to get the full spectrum of them, you kind of have to get to the point where you've fatigued everything, or you've fatigued the large majority of them to get as many as possible. And with that, so say is this a correct statement? If you're what do you call it? Using more motor units, would that be a indicator that you're getting more mechanical tension?
I missed that first part. Sorry, I would just repeat that probably.
So if we're recruiting more motor units in general than recruiting less, would that be a good indicator that you're getting more mechanical tension?
Maybe, depending on how we're measuring mechanical tension. I guess like you could do a higher rep set and not get as much mechanical tension per rep, but you might get more across the total set.
Right, yes.
You could say only recruit the bottom 50% of your motor units on the first rep, slowly fatigue them out. It might be, I said a 30 rep set where you slowly fatigue them out, slowly engage higher threshold motor units and recruit or accumulated more mechanical tension over the course of that set than if you just did a 1 RM, which the magnitude of tension per set will be sky high, but you just exposed your fibers to 1 rep of tension and that's it.
Right.
So it's the sort of the exposure to tension that really dictates how much muscle we grow, and that's where the sort of the volume versus intensity argument comes from. Yes, we know we need adequate intensity to engage the muscle fibers and recruit high threshold motor units to begin with. But once they're recruited, it's the volume that's kind of dictating how much, how long, how often they're recruited.
So would you say the intensity is a given as long as you're reaching, the benefits from the intensity are a given as long as you're reaching adequate RPE?
Yes. I think that's pretty much right. So when we go back to our 1 to 5 example, using a weight that you could lift for reps lower than 5, almost every rep is a given adequate RPE.
Yes.
So there's some efficiency to that, I guess we could say, on a per rep basis, but you don't probably get the most. If you're only doing 3 reps, when a weight you used that could be used for 5 would have also recruited all high threshold motor units, doing a set of 6 is you're pretty much doubling your effective reps or something like that. Whereas if you do a set of 3, if the set of 3 is very taxing, you might need to take 5 minutes and then do another set, which leaves you gassed again, and you've only maybe achieved as much that did a set of 5 or 6.
So then,
because they also almost recruited every high threshold mode unit from the start of that set also.
And then what about, so I can't remember what I was thinking. So it was when it comes to all this sort of stuff, and when volume ties into this, and I'm hoping most people listening to this will understand volume. Do you want to give a quick overview of what a volume is and how you measure volume, what it generally is?
Yeah, volume is essentially just how much work we're doing, whereas when I say intensity, that is how hard the work is. And volume can be measured in a few different ways. Like it could be volume load, which is sets times reps times weight, or it could be just hard sets per week, sort of thing, which is becoming a more popular method because it's sort of become more established now that training needs to be hard enough, and then volume becomes a much greater predictor.
Yes.
So hard sets per week is not a bad method for measuring volume, just for practicality purposes.
Yeah.
And when I say intensity, that can be looked at in regards to absolute, which is basically how much weight is on the bar, or relative, which is, as we've been discussing, RPE and how close you are to failure, or percentage of VO2 max if we're using more broad sports science.
And then when it comes to rep ranges, would this be a fair statement? Sitting within the sort of 5 to 6 to 20 rep range, would you say this sort of rep range, you're more likely, or it's easier or more common that you'll achieve? And let's consider everything we're doing is at RPE 8 to 9 sort of range. And even if we're comparing this to the 1 to 5 rep range, if you compare the 1 to 5 rep range to the 6 to 20 rep range, would you say it's more likely that over a mesocycle, or so 6 weeks or whatever, how long the training cycle is for, would you say it's more likely over the 6 weeks that someone will achieve adequate volume, or even just within the session, if they're in the 6 to 20 rep range rather than the 1 to 5?
Potentially. I'm probably not giving very helpful or useful answers because they're all probably non-absolutes.
That's science.
Yeah, true. Remind me to come back to the point about your rant on people's feet rolling in on your Instagram story the other day as well.
What was it?
That made me laugh.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was pissing me off at work, eh?
No, it's all about some ranting and people not quite understanding things and thinking that. So you said it would be probably easier to achieve adequate volume using the 6 to 20 than the 1 to 5. That is likely to be true. However, I could easily think of ways, of constructing like a cycle or a mesocycle where we could skew it favorably to the 1 to 5. If we take the dumbest approach from the 6 to 20 and the smartest approach from the 1 to 5.
The 1 to 5 could win, obviously.
Yes. And even just like that's probably not a fair comparison also, because there's a broader range of reps that could be used in the 6 to 20 or something like that. Whereas to make it more a more even comparison, if we went, say, 1 to 5 and 6 to 10 or something like that, I would say, wait, was that right? 1 to 5, 5 to 10, let's go with that. That I would be much more in favor of the 5 to 10 on average than the 1 to 5. Yeah. However, I guess there's already an assumption embedded in the premise that it would be easier to achieve sufficient volume, whereas what we really need to be concerned with is achieving sufficient intensity and then maximizing how much volume we can achieve. So I think a useful way of conceptualizing it is essentially volume is turning the car on, and intensity is turning the car on, and volume is the accelerator.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how much you press the accelerator if the car isn't turned on.
Yes.
However, once the car is on, once we are working hard enough, or we're at the dance essentially,
Yeah.
then it's all about how much we can push that without crashing the car or head diving off a recovery cliff, sort of a thing.
Yes, yes. And so would you say that's the main thing? Because I think that's a good caveat to have with volume. Because say if someone listens to this and they're not wary of the dangers of sort of excessive amounts of volume, which I've made huge mistakes with for a long time, and I only recently fixed that. I would say maybe a year ago, 6 months ago, sort of realized what volume was and actually figured out volume's a thing and why it matters. And it's not just, you don't recover from a session in 1 week or 1 day or whatever.
Not at all.
Yeah. So, and then a good caveat is to that is just because you're increasing volume doesn't mean it's always beneficial. Like injuries exist. If you are an individual, so for instance, a lot of the people who follow me have scoliosis, and that's just spinal curve. A lot of them have it fixed by spinal fusion.
In that category, for the record.
Yep. Do you have scoliosis as well? Did you say?
Yeah, I've got mild scoliosis.
Oh, yeah,
Nothing as impressive as yours, but
Impressive.
yeah. Impressive's probably a loosely used word in that regard.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I find a lot of them I found more, not a lot of them, I'd say more anecdotally myself. I don't know if it's just how I'm built or if it's correlated with the scoliosis or what, but I found my joints are very, very weak. So they are always the first thing to break. And the way that I've found to protect them is to control volume. And that's pretty much all I've done, and my injuries have gone through the floor. Like no injuries, basically. Well, the injuries that I have that are sort of chronic injuries are way, way, way less. And they're way more... I can work around them just by exercise selection and volume alone, which has been phenomenal, which I hope... That's one of the things that I really, really, really want to push in fitness, because I think it's skipped over so often, and just because someone's doing a weird exercise, they have rationale, I think there's no issues. Like, I'm always doing weird shit in the gym, and it's like, for me it works. Like, I recently started doing, my new program it's got floor press as the main chest press, and I'm pretty much not doing any other pressing movement for a while, but it's like under the context of I have costochondritis right now, trying to deal with that, so trying to figure out how to, and that's just rib inflammation, so I'm trying to figure out how to not have any, or try and lower the amount of rib inflammation, see if that helps, because it's been chronic. And then also I find I have a large amount of difficulty connecting with my pecs, so even feeling anything, even feeling them activate at all during a movement, not just through the burn, like I just mean actually moving, because I think that's caused extra stress on my triceps as well, because I think they've been taking over on pressing movements or doing as much as they can, which I don't think is too beneficial, because it seems as though the excessive stress has caused tendonitis in both triceps, and then that combined with a lack of pec activation is all overall just, it's not the best thing. But what sort of thoughts did you have about the pronation thing? Because that's the kind of thing where I had someone come into work and it was like, well, it happens every fucking day. So I work at shoe clinics, so we sell, like, it's similar to the athlete's foot. I believe you have that in Australia. Yeah, so we sell like sort of running shoes, and I have a lot of thoughts about that, and because I'm studying podiatry, so it's like everything to do with feet, all fun stuff. Because I used to like distance running back in the day. That's why I did podiatry, but now I don't. So I just want to lift weights. But
yeah, I for starters, I just love people who don't filter themselves, I guess. I know filtering is definitely of some importance, especially in our growing...
I don't think so. I think
politically correct...
The moment you filter yourself, it's like I have relatively out there political views, and I try, like, for instance, if I go to a party, I'll get in a debate, 100%.
That's why I stopped going to parties.
Like, my friends will almost bait me. Like, some dude was saying some dumb shit about the gym, and I was like, fuck. Like, he literally said a calorie deficit is a pretty good way to lose weight. And I'm like, you don't even understand what a calorie deficit is. Like, fucking hell. Oh,
It's like,
God.
yeah, gravity's a pretty good way to stay glued to Earth.
It's like fucking hell. God. And that, I think, like, I think the even especially in today's society, I think staying unfiltered is extremely beneficial. I mean, it hasn't gotten me in much shit yet, but I think it will. But, you know,
I think
I'd rather be this way than the other way.
there are certainly so many benefits to, well, like we also need to be careful, I guess, in the way that we discuss saying unfiltered. Like, it doesn't mean you just say like whatever you think to anyone, but
Yes.
like I will tend to verbalize a lot of the like concerns or issues, or if someone is doing something, I'm just like, I think you need to be aware of this, or like someone's
Yes.
like, you need to be careful about hurting their feelings. And I was like, well, but what they're doing seems like it's going to be unproductive to them in the long run. Or
Yes.
when people are judgmental of you being unfiltered, I'm sort of the opinion, it's like, I know you're thinking these things as well. Like, don't
Yes. I
don't
completely
shoot
agree.
me down just for verbalizing things that you're uncomfortable with doing. Like, if you're uncomfortable with doing so, that is also fine. We need to all be wary of social ostracism and being cast as an outsider. But just the human condition is fraught with all kinds of uncomfortable thoughts and desires and things like that. And I think
And
one
most
of
of them
the
aren't, like,
safest
a lot of
things-
things aren't nice to say, but they're beneficial in the long term. Like, for instance, I was in the gym with my friend the other day, and he said something, and I'm like, I basically said something that offended him a reasonable amount, and he was mad for like 5 minutes, and we have the sort of relationship, we can say those things to each other, and then 5 minutes later, he's like, I'm glad you said that to me. You're correct. And it's like, I think if you can't say that, then it's like, okay, what are you just going to let it sit there and let them keep going in that bad way? And I think it's, especially in the like 16 to 22 year old sort of demographic, especially with social media, everyone's so whitewashed nowadays, and they won't say what they feel in any way. Like, they're too scared to say anything that could be relatively received badly, and I'm like, why don't you just say it? Because it's like, what's the repercussions? You end up hanging out with people who actually are okay with you thinking broadly. Like, for instance, my workmate is extreme. Like, she's on the opposite end of the political spectrum as me, completely opposite ends. But we can have talks about it, and we can speak about it, and no one's like, fuck you, you're a Nazi. Like, no one says that. So it's just like,
Well, that's nice.
yeah, it's very nice. 'Cause you can actually talk about it instead of having like it degenerating into not productive discussion, which I think is just horrible. And there's just no reason for it.
No, I think Steven Pinker does a really cool.
I've been
really
recommended
cool
him
video.
many times. Now I definitely
you
have
did?
to see him because Mike Ichital also recommended him. He said, "Go watch Steven Pinker."
Oh, Steven Pinker's the man. He's got a fantastic. The Blank Slate. His book, The Blank Slate, is just astronomically informative. And he's got a really cool video on YouTube of a lecture he does on why we need free speech. Like, we need to let people say dumb things. Like, just illustrating your own cognitive inadequacy through saying dumb things is perfectly fine if people can be like, you're a fucking idiot, I'm not going to associate with you. Like, whereas I think we do more damage by being like, you can't say that, or
Exactly.
Keeping people protected.
Yes.
We can only examine these things when we get them all out in the open. And if things fester beneath the surface, that's where disease tends to come
actually
from.
bad happens. Like, it's why I'm not really like this. I don't want to get too much into politics, but it's like the whole PC culture. It's like when it's like, oh no, you're not allowed to say that. I get it with certain words, right? Because maybe they're offensive or all that. But it's like, I don't think you shouldn't be able to talk about the topic, or shouldn't be able to say, I kind of think this, and it's kind of highly politically incorrect, but maybe logically it's correct. So it's like, why should you not bring that up if logically it's better for everyone in the long term? And I don't want to bring up any specific issues, but it's like, there's certain things where it's like, okay, from what I've seen, that might not actually be true, but it's the general consensus. Why does everyone still go along with it? Just because it's easy to believe, or it's a nice thing to wish that was the case?
Completely. It's just everyone sort of just jumps on board.
Yeah, and I think
it's the popular opinion.
Yeah, and that annoys me to no end. And I think in some ways it does apply to fitness, because it's like you'll get people in the gym who just like the average dudes in the university gym, right? The university gym that I go to, they'll say things, and it's like, you are not informed at all whatsoever. And you might be doing an exercise science degree, and I'm like, you still don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And I'm like, God. Like,
well, yeah, because that's presuming that exercise science degrees will even teach you exercise science.
Do you think it's a reasonable path, or do you not think so?
Or? I think it can be made to be a good path, but I think anything can be made to be a good path. As you said, like, you are mostly self-taught through, well, no doubt you cover some anatomy and things like that in your podiatry degree.
Yeah.
And that gives you some general principles.
But I wouldn't say
of how to...
that's why I've even learned. Like, I've almost disagree with half the stuff they say in there. Like, for instance, but I guess I'm taking it from a different lens, but there's just a lot of things where I'm very skeptical. For instance, this is something that I highly, highly disagreed with. And I had literally argued this in class. They said, they was going through a bunch of risk factors for something, and they said, taking steroids will make you more likely to have X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, no, you cannot say that, because there's not just one steroid. There's a broad range of steroids. So it's like, you have to explain, like, you can't, because everyone, like, I'm natural, and I think I'll stay natural for probably a long time. Maybe I'll always be natural. Not sure. But it's like, you can't just say that they're all bad all the time, forever, and that they're all the exact same and they're all going to kill you. It's like, there's a broad range there. Like, there's a big difference between taking testosterone and taking tren. Like, that's a broad range, and it's like people like to, especially in like the news or whatever, they'll like to dismiss it as saying, it's just like they're all bad for you, and demons take them, only demons take them, and only dirty bodybuilders. But it's like, what? Like, there's some very, very intelligent people who take steroids in very, very intelligent ways. So it's just like, that's the thing. It's not a black and white issue. And people like to simplify it down to that, which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, steroids were developed for medical purposes. Like, there's you've got someone laying in a hospital bed, who's been diagnosed with like HIV/AIDS and muscle wasting and all kinds of things like this. It's like, yeah, they probably need some help to support muscle. That's going to kill them. Like, like surgeries and burn victims and things like that utilize glutamine at a much higher rate. And where do you get glutamine from? Like, you pull it out of muscle tissue, and before you know it, so there's just a cascade of poor health outcomes from not having enough muscle, which is, I think, one of the fundamental reasons why the standard of personal training, to sort of almost go full circle, needs to be raised in Australia and worldwide, so that people respect personal trainers, so that people can be more comfortable and have more confidence in hiring one, being active, being healthy, because like, we have I don't want to use sort of hysterical words, but there is just so much metabolic disease, obesity, things like that, and that so much of that can be countered by adequate activity, obviously, education and muscle growth. Like,
yes, I completely
type 2 diabetes,
agree.
It's like,
this is why I'm changing degrees. Well, this is why I'm going to do my degree and then do my exercise science, because it's like, if you become, I don't want to bash people in the medical profession. I'm sure they do a fantastic job, and this is not what they're thinking about. But for me, if I went into a medical degree, or if I became a podiatrist, a physio, or something, I guess not physio, but say if I went in, basically, the issue that I find is you're putting a Band-Aid on the issues caused by being unfit, and just in general being not healthy. and I feel like the majority of it, like if everyone just did like a little bit of sort of bodybuilding style training, I feel like they'd be tons better off. And it's like this, especially I find in female demographics, the resistance to building muscle, I find disconcerting, because it's like, what I think it's just it's I don't think very, very, very rarely do we find that a person is less attractive because they have more muscle. And I think even in women, it's like, unless they're like Olympia level physique, I think even to the general public, you'll see a woman with a lot of muscle and you'll think, oh, they look like a healthy human being, that's attractive, instead of thinking, oh, they're so manly. Like, I just don't think that's the case. And I think I wish the general public would sort of understand that, like, if you get more muscle, you're probably healthier in general, you'll probably live longer, you'll be better off in every single way, and you'll probably like how you look a lot better, because you can adapt, you can change that. You can't change your bone structure, you can kind of change your fat, but it's like that is still not going to do that much, because I feel like you won't have anything to support it when you get down there. So it's like, if you cut, what would you be cutting to? Bones, like, so it's like, it's I find it quite
completely.
It's I find quite worrying, because it's like a lot of people have this resistance to getting jacked, but it's like, it's not just this aesthetic revolution BS. Like, it's actually really fucking good for you, and it's good for your mental health. It's like, I think I was asked this yesterday. There was like, oh, what do you love so much about bodybuilding? And I was trying to articulate it, and I sometimes think that it could be potentially, what do you call it, body dysmorphia or something. But then again, it's like, it is intensely fascinating, but then again, it started out of hating how I looked. So I'd say that's relatively common. Do you think that in general the pursuit of bodybuilding would you say in general it's healthy, unhealthy, mentally, and in general probably physically it's relatively healthy, but would you say mentally and as a general pursuit?
Yeah, I think again, it exists on a spectrum, and I can't give absolutes. However, I think what is so enjoyable and almost addictive about the process is, what I find at least, is it is just fundamentally self-betterment. Like, that is, I think, what is so addictive about it, and that is exacerbated within the evidence-based community, because it's not just we're getting bigger, stronger, healthier. It's let's get happier, let's get smarter, let's have better relationships, let's have better views on food. Like, it is such a, to use a horrible word these days, holistic. It is such a more holistic approach. And I do just think the evidence-based fitness community represents self-betterment on average. And I think that is a fantastic thing. There are people that do bodybuilding in horrible ways. And I obviously won't name names, but so many of the clients we get for contest prep and things like that, it's like, oh, hey, I did contest prep with so-and-so. He cut my water 5 days out. I'm a 52 kilo bikini girl. I have one quadricep myofibril. Like, I have one muscle fiber, like, in my whole upper body almost. And he cut water out and then glycogen loaded me and all kinds of shit like this. And it's like, this fucker is going to kill someone. Like, or like, at least wreck a lot of, psychological states along the way. But it's fantastic for our prep coaches. Like, Martin, I think maybe Jacob even spoke to you about having like 10 clients over the past year from one prominent social media coach in like Melbourne. It's like, fucking whatever. But anyway, where did that start? Bodybuilding, that's right. It can be done poorly and it can be done very well, but that is not really an informative statement, because that could go for eating eggs for breakfast or finishing your day with heroin. Like, like, you can do things in
It's all
very
grey.
small
There's
ways.
life is not black and white in pretty much any. There's very, 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 very few things which are black and white, and I think
Well, if you read the news, that it's all pretty much black to white.
it's all.
Whether it's printed on black and white paper, or it's black suppressing whites. White suppressing blacks. But yeah, anyway, I won't get into that.
I think with these kind of things, like, I always get very, especially in the last like 6 months. I wouldn't say it hasn't made me depressed. Like, it hasn't made me emotionally sad, but it's made me. It's almost like false. It's almost like a lack of hope. It's like, fuck. Like, everyone in the industry feels like it's just doing shit, and it's like. It really sucks, because then it's like, I feel like the amount of people that are like JPS, that are like 3DMJ, that are like just actually good people is so tiny, which I think it baffles me.
Yeah, that shouldn't baffle you, and don't lose hope because of that. Like the fact that 3DMJ or Renaissance Periodization or Revive Stronger, the fact that these companies exist is fantastic, and that should give hope more than the opposite.
Yes.
Something that I'm a big fan of is what's known as Sturgeon's Law or Sturgeon's Revelation, which is like essentially stands for 90% of anything is shit. Like, you can, like, by definition, the elite is going to be a very small portion of things. So when people rag on, and there's plenty of local coaches in Melbourne that do this as well, that rag on the state of the fitness industry, it's like almost every industry is the exact same. Like, I train doctors, I train psychologists, I train people across a broad range of industries, and they're like, it's the exact same. We've got dumb asses in our industry too. Like, I've got a girl studying psychology at the moment, and she's like, I want to find the JPS of psychology, but I can't. Like, it's so you're not shedding any kind of like, most of everyone is shit and fuck the shit. Like, 90% of songs don't make it to radio, 90% of paintings or whatever don't make it to museums, 90% of movies don't get produced. Like, yeah, no fucking shit. Like, critique the best and try and improve things. I think that's...
Instead of just saying... Like, for instance, those YouTube channels that just say, oh, fuck this dude, he's fake. Like, I was talking about it with Eric, and he was basically saying, like... I can't remember his comments on it, but he was basically like, you're not really... There's zero contributions there. You're not... They're trying to carry this facade like they're building something, but it's just not. And I think it is... I find it quite difficult, because it's like, I see so many people doing so many things wrong, and then you go to a gym and you see someone doing just some retard shit, and it's like, that seems so prominent. And then... But I think it's... I agree. I think it's definitely much better to focus on and improve what actually is beneficial, not just prove to everyone why Simeon Panda's a retard or whatever. Like, that's not that hard. So it's like, but it's very hard to like critique Mike Ishita's work. Like, it's like, that's much more difficult than being like, oh, Simeon Panda's bad because X, Y, and Z. Like, there's a big difference there.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, I think we'll finish up with this. What would be, when it comes to all this sort of stuff, what do you think are the main things that people should focus on when it comes to hypertrophy, and what do you think they should almost just disregard?
Always focus on acquiring more knowledge. I think that is the foundation of improving anything. From a practical aspect, you need to work on having good technique, getting stronger using good technique, training hard, acquiring more volume through your training, provided it's hard enough, recovering, and sleeping, eating, managing stress, and then being a happy and healthy individual outside of that. Like, if you are not happy or if you are not healthy, you are going to grow minimal muscle growth in the long run. It is a process. You need to understand it takes time, but you can be more muscular in a month's time than what you are now. You can be more muscular in a year's time than what you are now, and you can be very happy with who you become along the way. If you look at things on a long time scale.
Yes, I think a good mindset to keep is sort of, and it's almost cliche, but it's like
easily.
Sorry, I think you just cut out there.
No, that's go for it. Like I think
So
that's my rant.
Right. So I think a good mindset to keep is sort of the whole, and I think it's something that I've only recently developed, is kind of being relatively content of where you are now and sort of thinking, wow. And maybe it's just a product of I'm very happy with my progress, but then also being extremely excited for the future in ways like, wow, where will I be in 3 years now that... And I guess it is the pursuit of knowledge, because now it's like, okay, the more I learn, the more I realize, oh shit, I can write a better program for myself, I can diet better or whatever, like I can do everything better, and that gives me excitement for the future, but that doesn't mean to say what you have now is useless or unvaluable sort of thing. And
no, completely.
Yeah. And I think we'll finish up there. So where can people find you? Where can people find JPS? And do you want to give us a little talk? What is the JPS mentorship program? And then what is all the other products that JPS is involved in?
Yeah, so the mentorship program is JPS's attempt or contribution to raising the standard of the industry, in essence. We are not in a position at the current point in time to change the complete regulation of the industry. We now provide accreditation as personal trainers, like Cert 3 and 4s through JPS. Some parts of that we cannot change. However, we can, that's the cake, and then we put the JPS icing on top and be like, look, everything you learned was mostly useless, but if you want to be a good personal trainer, here's what we do. And then the mentorship program is kind of the sort of the university degree on top of your finishing school. Essentially, we have tried to. It has nearly killed Jacob and I putting it together. We've nearly killed each other. Jacob's partner's nearly killed us. Sam's nearly killed us. But it is probably the thing that I'm most proud of so far in my life. It's not perfect by any means, and I'm probably going to do a bad sales pitch, but we have put what we think is important for trainers and coaches to know into it. We've hired some of the best, I would say, the best, the cream of the copper in the industry to contribute to it.
Would you like to roll off some names? Because a lot of people will know a lot. Like I've had quite a few of the people on. Yeah,
for sure. Like we've had Brian Minor, Danny Lennon, Mike Israel, James Krieger. You get access to the 3DMJ lifting library. You get subscriptions to Matt. We threw everything at it, and just I can promise you, by the time this comes out, unfortunately enrollment will have closed. The second intake will be around mid-year. But beyond that, Jacob and I, this is what we love about what we do. We love coaching, but it's just education on a broader perspective. Like, not only do we love educating clients, but we love educating other coaches. We're so passionate about it, and we will help. I promise you, we will answer emails, we'll ask questions, or we just want to interact with people that are passionate about what we share.
One thing I'd like to mention is, since they're associated with people like 3DMJ, people like Renaissance Periodization, they respect and support JPS, and people like that don't put their names behind things lightly. So then, if you're a fan of pretty much any of those, you'd probably be a fan of JPS, because if those sort of people agree with what JPS is doing, it's very, very easy to sort of see, and relatively fast you sort of realize why. Once I found JPS, I was like, okay, wow, I see why these people support these sort of things, because they think with the same sort of rationale, they think logically, and they're fair and evidence-based in a true sense, which I think is rare. So it's one of the golden eggs in the industry, and it's follow their content, like just go watch, because I don't think there's not many of those sort of companies out there, and try and find all of them that you can, because and there's a reason that these people support them.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's really kind of you to say. I can honestly say we are so passionate about what we do. I live in a house with 2 other coaches, people from work. I live with Sam, Jacob's brother, and Declan, one of our other coaches. And we honestly probably work too much around the clock, but we are all just so passionate about what we do. And I think that in itself, it doesn't even really matter what people are passionate about. But I gravitate towards Instagram pages where someone is just clearly showing they are living what makes them happy. And yeah, I would hope that JPS is one of those pages if you're interested in following us on Instagram.
So what would be the Instagram handles?
So if you're interested in, I guess, seeing more of just our general population stuff, transformations, rough recommendations on how to, just go about a healthier, fitter lifestyle, then JPS Health and Fitness, I believe it is on Instagram. JPS_education is more about training, dieting, and the coaching process. They're the 2 main work accounts. You can find JPS podcast blog just through Google. Follow Jacob. Jacob probably puts up more consumable content than myself. I find Instagram just a fun little playground to just post mostly inappropriate things on, I guess. So if there's, I guess, a desire for me to put out more education through my Instagram, I'm happy to do so, but I like at least keeping that as a bit of a personal element for myself. I'm more than happy to converse with people through Instagram. So please, for anyone listening to this, for starters, if I've said anything that you disagree with or you think I can be pulled up on, please feel free to contact me and critique me. You're not protecting me from hurting my feelings or anything like that. I just want to get better like everyone else. But if anyone has listened today and found it interesting, please do feel free to get in contact with me. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, or email my work email, which is just lyndon@jpshealthandfitness.com.au.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Student Side Hustle. I would appreciate so much if you would leave a review if you'd like to hear more of what I'm saying. Then I would love if you would follow me on Instagram or check out my other social media, all linked in the show notes. And again, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful evening and study hard.